To start off my series for the Christmas candle ring or pick that we're making, we're going to be working with the pine needles first, and we're going to be working with the continuous loop technique. This is what your little pine needle stem will look like when we are done. Now, to gather materials for this, I have multiple bead spinners, so I'm going to use multiple bead spinners. If you just have one bead spinner, I would recommend putting the green in there. I've got a transparent green rainbow that I'm going to be using. So I've just got my green in there. For my white beads, I want my needles to look kind of frosted. So I'm going to be using a mix of two different whites along with the green. So I've just got an opaque white rainbow. This is specifically Matsuno brand, but most brands make this color. You can definitely substitute a different brand. It doesn't matter. This is a pretty standard color across any brand of seed bead, and so is this transparent green rainbow. It's also Matsuno, but again, most brands make the same color, and you can easily substitute in French beading. Now, the other white that I'm using is Miyuki gilt-lined opal, which is number 551. Now, what we're going to do first is we're going to mix the white together. So we're going to do about a 1-to-1 ratio of our whites. It doesn't need to be exact. It's not a big deal. I'm just going to put in some of that. And then I'm just going to put in about an equal amount of the other white. And then we're going to mix those together. I use an opaque because my wire is green. And I don't want the green to show through my white beads. If I'd use like a pearl or a Ceylon, this green wire would show up through there. So that's why I used an opaque, and then I just added a little bit of sparkle in there. Now we're going to make one more mix of the white and the green. So I'm going to dump a little bit of my white mix into this other bead spinner, hopefully not make too much of a mess. Now the white mix is mix 1, and then this green and white mix is going to be mix 2. And I recommend just making a little bit of mix 2 at a time, and then make more as needed. So again, I'm just doing about equal parts of the white mix and then the green. And then we're going to mix that together. I think I have a little bit more green in there than white, but I'm okay with that. It's not a huge deal. All right, now it's time to string our beads. I'm going to be working with a 24 gauge green copper core wire. This is Parawire brand, but again, there are other wire brands that you could use that would work just fine for this. Now, we are making continuous loops. And I'm going to leave my wire attached to my spool while I'm working, and I'm going to load beads at the beginning and then work with the wire still attached to the spool while I'm making all of my little loops. But we've got 3 different colors here. So what I'm going to do to get this effect on my pine needles is I'm just going to string about an inch, inch and a half of the green, and then one of the mixes. So let's say I want to do the green mix. And I'm going to string a little bit smaller length of that, so around a 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch there of whatever mix you just used. And then the green again. So I want my needles to have more green than the other colors. And then I'm going to switch to the other mix. Just do a short little line of that. Green again. About an inch to an inch and a half of the green. And then one of the mixes, a short 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch length of the mix, and then green again. Now, if you only have the one bead spinner, I would have the green in the bead spinner and then put your mixes in little bowls like these. And then you can kind of tip them sideways so that all the beads go down to the bottom. Make sure you've got a nice clean cut on the end of your wire, and kind of scoop up beads out of the cup just by kind of stabbing in like that. And you're going to continue stringing beads until you have 60 inches total. That is how much you need for one of these little pine needle units. Now we're going to be making 30 continuous loops with 2 inches of beads in each loop. To start out though, we need to leave a small tail wire. This tail wire is what we're going to be using to attach it to the stem during assembly. So we want to make sure that we have a long enough stem. And that's going to be about 2 to 3 inches. So we're going to have a starting tail wire right there, pinch and hold that length. And then we're going to measure out 2 inches of beads. To make a continuous loop, we're going to fold that length of beads exactly in half, and I like to go ahead and pinch it closed now. Now I'm holding the bottom of each half of my loop with my thumbnail, just kind of right underneath those beads to help hold tension on them. What we don't want is for our beads to come loose, because then we end up with wire gaps in the middle of our loop. So I'm going to hold tension this way, and then I'm going to grab right there at the base, let go with my thumbnail, and twist 2, 3, 4. That's 2 full rotations there that I'm twisting the little wires below my loop. Let me show you another way that you can make those loops. So I'm going to measure out another 2 inches of beads for my next loop, and I'm going to position them about it's about 1/4 of an inch away from the first loop. That will give me enough space to twist wire below the second loop and then have a little bit of space left over, which is exactly what we need. Okay, so I'm going to pinch and hold that length right there. Another way you can do these loops is to kind of floop the little length on itself, fold it in half, and then cross the wires right below the beads. And I've got my finger pushing up right behind the beads to help hold tension so that, again, they don't come loose before I'm able to twist. So push up on the back with my finger to hold that space, and then we're going 1, 2, 3, 4 to make 2 full rotations, and then make sure that you pinch your loop closed, because we're making pine needles here. We don't want an open gap between them. We want long, skinny needles. Now notice I've got a little bit of space left over. You should have about an 1/8 of an inch of space left over between your loops. Let me show you another way that you can make these loops. So I'm going to measure out another 2 inches again. And again, I need about a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch of space there right in front of my beads. And we're going to fold them in half again. Now what I'm going to do this time, this is for people who have a really hard time twisting wires, whether you have wrist problems or not. What you can do is kind of pull up on the beads using your fingers to help hold tension on those beads, because again, we do not want wire gaps in the middle of our loop. And then we're going to take this longer end of the wire and wrap it twice right below the bottom, right below that loop. So that's why you can make loops if you do not like twisting. And we're just going to continue with this until we have 30 of these little loops. After you've made 30 loops, your component will look like this. It may curl up on itself, which is perfectly fine. It's not a problem. Now, after the last loop, you're going to cut an ending tail wire of about 2 to 3 inches. So that'll just cut it right off of your spool. And then your component will look like this. The next step in making these little pine needles is to put it on a stem wire. Now this is an 18 gauge florist stem wire. You can also get 18 gauge galvanized steel for this. Now mine comes in an 18-inch length, and we're going to clip that down to size, but I'm going to go ahead and wrap it the full length now, because I'm making multiples of these. I've got brown floral tape, and I'm just going to leave it attached to my little roll. But the very end of the tape I'm going to stretch, because that's what activates the stickiness of the tape. And then I'm going to lay it over the tip of my wire, so it kind of goes a little bit past the top of the wire. Then we're going to fold the tape on itself and try to stick itself to itself on the other side. There should be a little tab right at the top there that you can fold down to cover the top of your wire. And then we're going to wrap down at an angle. So we're going to go down, twirl the stem. Sometimes you have to squeeze really hard right here at the top to get that floral tape started sticking to itself. But you should be going down at an angle, and you'll need to stretch the tape and then spin your stem, stretch and spin, stretch and spin, always down at an angle, slightly overlapping, because the tape is made to stick to itself. And we're just going to continue down all the way to the bottom of the stem. Stretch, spin, stretch, spin. And at the bottom, I usually just tear it off. Okay, now I'm going to cut this to a 6-inch length. So I need 6 inches. And then I'm going to take my little needle unit and I'm going to find the starting tail wire. And I'm going to attach this to the end of my 18 gauge stem wire. So I'm just going to kind of lay the tail of the wire right against the stem wire and then wind the little tail wire right there so that first loop is right at the top of the stem wire. And now we're going to wrap this unit down this stem, and just like the floral tape, we need to wrap down at an angle so that we're continuously moving downward. So again, I'm going to pull up my unit at an angle and I'm going to wrap down. I want about 1/8 of an inch between my wraps, between this wrap and this wrap. I want about 1/8 inch of space there to make sure that my stem ends up the length that I want it. Okay, now some of these little loops, sometimes they try to bend down and get in the way, so just kind of push them back up. And continue wrapping very tightly down the length of your stem. After you've wrapped the last loop, we're going to wrap this little tail wire a few times right there below just to secure it. Push all those up. And we're going to cover this little stem below with floral tape. So again, I'm just going to stretch the end of my tape, wrap it around the stem, and stick it to itself on the other side. I'm going to squeeze right here while I spin it a little bit to make sure that tape is stuck down. And then we're just going to cover over it again just to make sure that our wire is concealed. Now I'm going to go through all my little loops, make sure that they aren't twisted. I want my needles, pine needles are pretty straight, so I'm going to make sure that they are all not twisty or bendy. Make sure all my loops are squeezed closed so I don't have a gap. And I'm also going to kind of shift them around to try and cover as much of the stem in the center as possible so I don't see those wraps quite as much. So kind of move them around, fluff them out a little bit so they aren't quite so condensed against the stem. Okay, so there is my finished pine needle stem. If you are making the candle ring option, you need to make 18 of these. If you're making just one single pick, you will need to make 3.